Well, hello, poetry lovers. So this is going to be my first presentation of the semester then, and I just want to walk you through how one might unpack a poem. And so this is The Investment by Robert Frost, and I'll just read it for you, and then we'll go ahead and pull it apart a little bit. The Investment by Robert Frost. Over back where they speak of life as staying, you couldn't call it living for it ain't. There was an old, old house renewed with paint, and in it a piano loudly playing. Out in the plowed ground in the cold a digger, among unearthed potatoes standing still, was counting winter dinners one a hill, with half an ear to the piano's vigor. All that piano and new paint back there, was it some money suddenly come into? Or some extravagance young love had been to? Or old love, on an impulse not to care, not to sink under being man and wife, but get some color and music out of life? Okay, so let's take a quick look then at the poem itself. So what you want to do is as you read it, and I would have you do this, before I go on, just press pause on this video, and I gave you a resource on the Canvas page, the module for week 1, where I asked you to, or made available to you, the opportunity for you to download a Word document that's the text of this poem. And so what you might want to consider doing is go ahead and download that thing and print it, and then you can follow along. But even if you don't do that, I think it's useful for you to read the poem once, then read it again. The more times you read it, the more stuff is going to appear. It's just sort of the way it is. And then the more experienced you get at this, then the more is going to appear to you in the first couple of readings. Okay, so a month from now, when you will have read, dozens and dozens, well over 100 poems, then you will again have developed a good sense of how poems appear. And so, as I will say repeatedly, the idea here is we're trying to figure out, like, what's the so some people call it the theme of the poem. You'll hear me use the terms central impulse or central obsession. In other words, what it is that the poet was trying to say in a certain kind of way. Okay, and so your interpretation, if we want to call it that, is should just be based on what's there in front of you, and over time you will, once you are introduced to, and in some cases maybe this is just a refresher for you, but as you become more familiar with and start to absorb the terms and what they mean and how they work, then you're going to see more and more appear out of the poem. Okay, so let's start with the really easy part first. Okay. And by the way, I'm going to be covering all this kind of business in subsequent presentations. I'm walking through the Bedford Introduction to Literature sort of in the way that they have it laid out, just because I figured it would be simpler for you all for me to do that. So when we're going to begin with word choice, word order, and tone. And then we'll work our way into imagery and things of that nature. So the easiest way, if you heard me read this out loud, and if you stopped and read this aloud to yourself, you're going to notice that this poem takes on a particular form. Okay, and so it's actually a sonnet. And of the two kinds of sonnets that we're going to concern ourselves with in this particular class, the English, otherwise known as Shakespearean, and the Italian, otherwise known as the Petrarchan sonnets, are the ones that are going to be front and center for most of the semester. Okay, you'll learn all about that later. So I'm going to be using language that for some of you may be strange and first time you've heard it, but we'll go ahead and deal with this thing real quick. So what I'm going to do first is some of the nuts and bolts stuff. Because I noticed that there's a rhyme scheme here, I'm going to go ahead and take a look at what the scheme is. So the way you mark rhyme scheme, you take that last word of each line and you give it a letter, a lowercase letter. So here, first line gets an A, it's always a lowercase a. And then so staying and ain't don't rhyme, so I'm going to give the second line a B. Paint and ain't rhyme, so I'm going to give that a B. And then playing and staying again, those are exact rhymes. So my rhyme scheme for the this first stanza, 4-line stanza, is called a quatrain, is ABBA. So let's see what happens in the next stanza. So digger doesn't rhyme with anything that preceded it, so I'm going to give it a C. Still and hill rhyme together, so they're going to get D's, and then bigger is a C. Okay, so then we're going to take a look at our last two stanzas. So we ended with C, and it doesn't look like these guys rhyme with anything that we saw before. So we're going to go with an E, an F, an E, and then it looks like the last two lines, wife and life, rhyme. So we have the two G's. Okay, so one thing I want you to pay attention to is this: that in a standard, an English sonnet is going to have a particular rhyme scheme. It generally rhymes. In this case, it would be A B A B, C D C D, and then you get over here, and it would be E F E F, and then G G. Okay, would be the rhyme scheme that the poet is going to be following. Okay, because there are rules, there are conventions that a poet needs to follow when writing in a particular form, and this is the form of the sonnet. So what then the Italian would rhyme like this: it'd be ABBA, ABBA, and then it'd be some variation. These last 6 lines would be bunched together. So unlike here, where you've got the four lines of the quatrain and then the concluding couplet, these last 6 lines would be together, and generally they, from a logic standpoint, they're going to address something that was introduced in the first part of the poem. So the first part of the poem, the first 8 lines might be like a question or a situation is raised, and then the last part, the sestet, that's the name for this last 6 lines, would comment on it or would answer the question or something of that nature. Okay, but here, what I want to point out to you is this. Look here, we've got 2 lines that rhyme are called couplets. So interestingly, I've got 1 couplet, 2 couplets. We go back to the beginning. What do I have there? I have 2 more and 2 more here. Okay, so now you might say to yourself, well, okay, so what? Well, I'm going to point out that what the author has done here, what the poet has done here, is this is a poem about a couple, yes? And so if you take a look at the title, The Investment, so it's the word investment generally connotes certain things that are relatively formal and pretty serious. I mean, we invest in stuff, we expect there to be what? A return. And when we talk about an investment, we generally are talking about something, financial, right? So, I spend $1,000 and buy a bunch of stock in some company, and my expectation is, okay, if I invest in it, then I'm expecting a return, that my money should be working for me and making more than I put into it. All right, so if we think about that in terms of a relationship, okay, so we know they're a married couple, right? Not to sink under being man and wife. Okay, so we know right away that they have a formal marriage. Okay, and so the poem is musing on, what does it mean to be happy in a marriage? Like, what do you got to do? Maybe what are the characteristics of a marriage? So if you take a look at this opening, okay, over back, where they speak of life as staying. All right, so over back. So if we're going to look at the exact language that Frost is using, over back. Another way of looking at that is like, over yonder. Okay, so the sense is that we're talking about a remote location. It's where maybe the uncultured people live. You couldn't call it living, for it ain't. So him dropping in this diction with the word ain't, okay, which is highly colloquial. It's okay, I know ain't's in the dictionary, but it's not considered to be proper usage, right? But he is essentially quoting those people who speak of life as staying. All right? There was an old house renewed with paint, and in it a piano loudly playing. All right, so the repetition of old and old is again supposed to accentuate this sense of the home's age. Yep. And notice he doesn't say a home, he says house. Using this, the repetition of these two words is a figure called epizeuxis. It's spelled Epizeuxis. And it's the repetition of one word. It can be 2 times, 3 times, whatever. You've heard the old adage about the 3 most important things in real estate are location, location, location. That's another example of epizeuxis. You use it for emphasis. Okay, so instead of very old, which would mess up the meter of the line, as in the number of beats per line that we've got, he just repeats old. Okay, so in this first stanza, okay, he's setting the scene. We're out in the sticks, okay, old house, and in it a piano loudly playing. Notice again, word choice. He doesn't say somebody's playing it. He says that the piano is playing. So he invites us to assume that there's someone, of course, that is playing it. Now, it could be a player piano, one of those things where you like crank it up and it runs based on a spool that's got predetermined keys and all that kind of business. But this is the sense we have here is that there's somebody playing it. We just don't know who. Okay, so I want to point out a couple of things here. Let's count the number of syllables in the line because this is important. Over, back, where they speak of life as staying. Okay, so I'm going to count that as 11 beats. You couldn't call it living, for it ain't. Now I've got 10 beats. There was an old house renewed with paint. 10 beats. And in it a piano loudly playing. I've got 11 beats again. Okay. Now something else worth mentioning. So I've got this. Do you see there's a pattern here, right? I'm alternating. Not only am I alternating in rhyme, but I'm alternating in syllable count. Okay, so how about let's take a look at something else. Let's go ahead and scan. You should have been, I assume, introduced to scansion. In high school, scanning is the formal term for when you mark the stressed and unstressed syllables in a poem. That falls under the category of the accentual syllabic verse system. So you probably read, like, I don't know, Julius Caesar or some Shakespeare play, and you got taught what iambic pentameter is. So you know then that an iambic foot is a 2-beat foot. First syllable is unstressed, second syllable is stressed, right? And because penta means 5, that there are 5 of these things, right? All right, so let's take a look at what the meter in this opening is. Okay, over, back, where they speak of life as staying. Okay, you couldn't call it living, for it ain't. So here's what I want to point out to you. First line, okay, starts with a stressed syllable and ends with an unstressed syllable. Second line starts with an unstressed syllable and ends with a stressed syllable. Okay, so I'm getting ahead of myself here, and I'm going to tell you that a line that ends with an unstressed syllable is formally called a feminine line. It has a feminine ending. One that ends with a stressed syllable is called a masculine ending. Now, what I'm going to point out to you is this. It's amazing. Look, we have a feminine line followed by a masculine line. Okay? There was an old house renewed with paint, and in it a piano loudly playing. Okay, so here we go. You have now the repetition of, I've got this, the first line starts with a stressed syllable, second line unstressed. Third line starts with an unstressed, fourth line starts with a stressed. Feminine ending, masculine ending, feminine ending. Okay, now I'm not going to have you, and I'm not going to do this for the rest of the poem, but you're just going to have to trust me that this pattern continues for the entire poem, okay? This alternating of masculine and feminine endings. Now, again, who cares? Here's why we care. We're talking about a couple, right? A man and a woman. And so, see the alternating of the masculine and feminine rhyme. See the alternating of the rhyme scheme. We have the couplets. We have the alternating of the 11, 10, 10, and 11 beat lines. Okay? Out in the plowed ground in the cold a digger. Want to guess what the next line is in terms of syllable count? Among unearthed potatoes standing still. 10. Was counting winter dinners one a hill. 10. With half an ear to the piano's vigor. 11. All right. Now, okay, it does this the rest of the poem. Okay? This, again, we have this back and forth. Is it perhaps that the poet is suggesting that in order for a marriage to work, there is give and take? Perhaps. And so listen, I'm a formalist. All right? A formalist is somebody who looks at the formal elements of a work of literature, and in this case, it's poetry, and then says, what's that stuff doing? Like, right? I mean, what's its function? What's its effect? So I'm telling you that Robert Frost absolutely had a design in creating this poem. All right, so let's take a look at the second stanza. First one sets the scene. Now, again, we talk about word choice, right? One word versus another, and then word order, like how are we arranging the words? So how fabulous is this? Out in the plowed ground, in the cold, a digger. Now, I realize that the time it takes to read that line is like, milliseconds. But your brain is registering this, out in the plowed ground. So if I said to you, what season are we in where there's plowed ground? 99% of you, and you'd be right 99% of the time, would say it's spring. Because that's when we plow. But not here. Plowed ground in the cold. So he surprises us with the coldness. So he sets us up for something, we anticipate something, and then he zips this little turn. We get a nice little surprise. Okay? A digger. Not a man, okay? Not a person, a digger. Among unearthed potatoes standing still. All right, so Robert Frost's people were from Ireland. So and they, according to his biographers, he left. His family left Ireland because of the potato blight in the 19th century. So the potatoes would have listen, this is the least sexy food on the planet, right? I mean, we're talking about, a potato is a tuber. It's a root, okay, like a carrot. But at least a carrot's got some color. Hey, potatoes, like, for the most part, just white, gray, funky thing, right? It looks like a rock coming out of the soil, all right? So it's clear that these people who are staying, okay, and they're not living, they're living off potatoes. And he's counting winter dinners, one a hill. These people are not wealthy, right? And so it begs the question that is asked by the speaker, like, the heck is going on with this piano business and the paint? All right? With half an ear to the piano's vigor. So that's a nice little figurative device there. We call that synecdoche because it's not the ear alone that's doing the hearing. It's the entire sort of auditory system. So on one hand, he is counting the potatoes that are there, right? Because it sounds like he's rationing, doesn't it? But he's also listening to the music. But he's not listening to the music as like, gee, I wonder what song she's playing. He's listening to the vigor. Because anyone who is playing the piano vigorously, we assume that they're what? They're enjoying themselves. Okay? This is a joyful expression of this woman's life. That she's up there in that old house, renewed with paint. Just playing the daylights out of that doggone piano. Right? Okay. So now what? as we push into the next stanza. And so the speaker asks a question that like all the neighbors are asking, and that we may very well ask for that matter. Like, this dude's out here counting potatoes, so it's clear that they're not, it's not like he's counting, the ribs on the cow or the pig to figure out how many, how many meals they're going to have that are sort of high class. And so, like, all that piano and new paint back there, over back, right? Was it some money suddenly come into? So they inherit this? Hey, they won the lottery or whatever, right? Is that the way that they've decided to spend their money? Is this the only way that they could possibly afford this extravagance? That he says into the next line, or some extravagance young love had been to. The assumption is that, when you're first married or whatever, you get your whole life in front of you. So, yeah, okay, we try to make each other happy, so we're going to spend some money on some stuff. And because we got decades and decades to, sock money away and build up our household. And so we just feel like younger people are forgive me, they're foolish and extravagant. But then, right here, okay, I'm marking that with a delta sign because there's a turn in the logic of the poem, because something has suddenly dawned on the speaker, and that is, or old love, on an impulse not to care about what? Like how much money we have in the bank, what other people think maybe, right? Not to sink under being man and wife, but get some color and music out of life. So this is super amazing. This long dash which extends that line, it's the musing of the speaker, and the speaker seems to be, in a certain kind of way, speaking for us, speaking for anyone who sees this situation. All right, so the idea of sinking under being man and wife, I mean, listen, I'm sure there are tons of marriages out there that have lasted for decades and decades, and they're just happy as pigs and you know what. Okay, and it's fabulous, and they've learned how to get along together, and they compliment each other, and they finish their sentences or whatever. But there's plenty that are not so much like that. Okay, and it's the assumption, just like the people over back, that assume that no one who's in the sort of stretched or stressed financial situation that these people seem to be in, like everybody else around them is, that they like, what are you doing spending your money on that kind of stuff? That the assumption is that if you've been married for a while, that it's going to weigh down on you. Okay, so the implied metaphor there of the weight of the marriage sinking them, and there's also the implied drowning idea. Okay, that it kills you being married. And what does it kill? Like your spirit, okay, your happiness, your individuality, all these sorts of things. Okay, but the speaker is suggesting that and again, we don't know for sure. So this poem is as much about the speaker and about us and our expectations as it is about anything else, because we are not told that this is the exact situation that's happening with this couple. Okay, it's an assumption, and it's a bright and cheerful one. This is a poem with a happy ending, and we do we assume that the marriage ends happily and their lives together? Well, I think it'd be legit to say so, given what it is that the speaker has offered for us. Okay, so get some color and music out of life. Notice that really, has there been a color mentioned anywhere in the poem? I mean, the implied color of what? The keys on the piano, black and white. Notice these. The poem is just absolutely loaded with dichotomies. Okay, so opposites. Right. So there's really, plowed ground. So we got the implied color of like brown for dirt. Not the sexiest color in the world, right? We don't know what color the house is. We can assume that it's probably white because white's cheap. cheaper than, we're not going to slap red on the farmhouse, I don't expect. Okay, so white's cheap, and we tend to think of farmhouses being painted white. Okay, but the potato, we already talked about that. The sort of the brownish tan skin of the on the outside, and then the sort of whitish yellow on the inside. Again, we don't have anything like sexy colors, and no color here. So we're asked to fill in, through our imaginations, we're asked to fill in, or the speaker's asking us to fill in. So we get to infuse this relationship and our, our interpretation of the poem. We get to fill in all the beautiful colors. Okay? So this is just, and I went way longer than I said I was going to go. I'm sorry about that. Anyhow, I hope this was helpful for you, and holler at me if you have questions. All right, peace.